I've uh, I've used this quote from Stanley Hauerwas a few times already in this series, but it continues to be an important and relevant one. Hauerwas says the basis for the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount is not what works, but rather the way God is. And that's a necessary reminder as we move into the final beatitude, one that comes as a natural result of having lived out the other seven. God's favor is on those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And in the last session, we talked about how God puts the responsibility for peacemaking in the hands of the persecuted. And this final statement reminds his listeners that even the persecuted have God's favor. That as you go about this work of peacemaking, you will have God's favor even through your persecution. That the presence of persecution does not mean the lack of God's favor. And you know, the persecution of Christians, it's a controversial topic in modern days. The religious liberty organization Open Doors compiled the annual watch list of countries where Christians face the most persecution. And their conclusion was that in 2024, and the 3 decades since their work started, that overall, the persecution of Christians has never been worse. Not in history, just since they started doing the data. Their conclusion was that more than 365 million Christians suffer high levels of persecution and discrimination for their faith. They found that 1 out of every 7 Christians are persecuted worldwide. That number is 1 out of 5 in Africa, 2 out of 5 in Asia. They found that nearly 15,000 churches or church properties were attacked in the year 2023. And they have found that surveillance of Christians continues to grow. And in fact, they told the story about when one Chinese province that Christians have to register with the government on an official app, and they can attend only the state-sanctioned church. And this kind of oppression, this kind of surveillance and persecution was something that the early church would have become very familiar with. If you read the book of Acts, you'll see the level of persecution from both the political and the religious realms is great. In Acts chapter 4 and 5, Peter and John are arrested by the religious authorities. And then in Acts chapter 6, Stephen becomes the first martyr for the faith. We know that the Apostle Paul, before his transformation, before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, intensely persecuted and killed Christians. Luke writes that Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. But then Paul becomes a Christian, and the persecutor becomes the persecuted. In Acts chapter 12, Herod Agrippa murders James. He imprisons Peter. In Acts chapter 14, people unsuccessfully try to stone Paul and Barnabas. And then in ruminating about all of these sufferings, all of these persecutions to the Corinthians, Paul writes that I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. And that's just the beginning of the church. You move into the 2nd century, we have a letter called the Epistle of Diognetus. And it offers this description of Christians. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, and yet abound in all. They are dishonored, and yet in their very dishonor are glorified. They are evilly spoken of, and yet are justified. They are reviled and blessed. They are insulted and repay the insult with honor. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by the Greeks, yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. So the life of a Christian from the 1st century, the 2nd century, and onward, and in many places throughout the world today, is one of persecution and difficulty and hardship. persecution all too often is the consequence of following Jesus. And that is because Christians should be a living indictment of the systems of empire. God's favor is on the persecuted. God's favor is on those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. So that is to say that God's favor is on those who stand against the principalities and powers of empire and demand justice. If you're poor in spirit, then your lifestyle is an attack on the systems of empire that call for richness, for fullness, and for excess in all things. If you mourn over inequality and injustice, if you cry out against police brutality or the carceral systems that imprison so many, or the death penalty that murders those made in the image of God, then your lifestyle is an attack on the violent racist systems of power and subjugation. If you're oppressed and you cry out for justice, then your lifestyle is an indictment of the hierarchical systems of power that explicitly or implicitly value some bodies over others. If you hunger and thirst after righteousness, after justice, if you protect the, the health of gender and sexual minorities, if you care for creation, if you demand a living wage, then your lifestyle, your actions will be an indictment of the capitalistic consumerism that consumes us. If you're merciful, then your lifestyle is an indictment of our so-called systems of justice that focus on retribution and violence. If you're pure in heart, then your lifestyle is an indictment of the worldly mindedness of the systems of empire that seek only after status and power. If you seek peace, then your lifestyle is an indictment of empires where trillions of dollars are spent not on the flourishing of human life, not on the flourishing of humanity, but to bring about its destruction. And all of that done in the name of peace. See, our lives should be incomprehensible to the systems of empire. And what the empire doesn't understand, it kills. And here's where we pause for a moment and we consider if that's our life. Is that our faith? Is that our belief? Is that our Christianity? Are we a part of that kingdom community, or are we a part of the empire? Is our persecution because of righteousness? Or is what we call persecution just pushback against our grasp and our connection with the systems of empire? I would make the case to you that a good contingent of Christianity, particularly Western Christianity, maybe even especially American Christianity, finds itself firmly within the grasp of empire. That, like the Pharisees and the teachers of the law in the day of Jesus, that there are contingents of the faith who have allied themselves with empire and found themselves the ones doing the persecuting. What many Christians in the West and America consider persecution, that's not persecution, but it's pushback to their attempts to control the empire. Relevant magazine, a Christian magazine, ran a headline some years back that said, somewhat sarcastically, 59% of American Christians say they're persecuted, may not understand real persecution. And it's satire, but it's truth. Because you cannot be persecuted if you're empowered. The message of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is to lay down the quest for power and to pick up the kingdom-minded humility that calls for systems of power to be dismantled and demands that they be called to account and demands for justice. And then to conclude the Beatitudes, Jesus breaks the pattern that he set so far and he makes it personal. He then says, "Blessed are you. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The upside down kingdom community of God, as laid out in the Sermon on the Mount, isn't one that's easy, but it is the life that Jesus sets before us. It's the life that he modeled, and we know the way because he went there first. And when you call out the systems of empire, the empire responds with strength and with violence. And Jesus calls us to respond with humility and peace. So we follow Jesus. We follow Jesus in calling out sin, privately and corporately and nationally. We follow Jesus in pursuing justice in our lives and in our homes and in our nation. We follow Jesus in demanding righteousness of ourselves and of our institutions. We follow Jesus in making peace, even if that peace places us between people at war. We follow Jesus in nonviolent resistance. We take up our crosses and we follow him. And when we do these things, then we inherit the earth in the kingdom of heaven. We will be comforted in our emptiness, and we will be filled with God's goodness. We will be shown mercy, and we will be called God's children. We will be brought into the very presence of God, and we will be made part of God's kingdom community.